There is a voice inside you that has been whispering for as long as you can remember, a quiet but persistent commentary on your every action, your every hope, your every silent prayer. It is the voice that measures your worth against the achievements of others, the voice that claps with feigned joy at your successes but secretly claims them as its own, the voice that flinches in fear at the prospect of true silence. This is the nafs, the ego, the constructed self that believes it is the entirety of who you are, and it has perfected the art of laughter. Its laughter is not a sound of joy, but a weapon of subtle dismissal, a cynical echo that reverberates in the chambers of your heart whenever you dare to reach for something more sacred, more profound, than the material world it so fiercely clings to. You may have heard this laughter yourself, in that quiet moment when you first considered sitting in remembrance, when you thought to close your eyes and repeat the divine names, and a thought, sharp and clear, arose from within: this is a waste of time. This is for the simple-minded. What could possibly come from this mere repetition of words? That was not your thought. That was the ego, laughing at the sacred technology of Dhikr, because Dhikr represents the one thing the ego cannot survive: its own dissolution into a love greater than its own story. This laughter finds its roots in a primal fear, the fear of annihilation, of fana. The ego is a fortress built from your memories, your identities, your accomplishments, and your wounds. It sees the continuous remembrance of Allah as a tidal wave of divine presence that will slowly, inevitably, wash away the very sands upon which its fortress stands. So it mocks. It distracts. It rationalizes. It tells you that you are too busy, too intelligent, too modern for such ancient practices. It is the Pharaoh within your own heart, declaring, "I am your Lord, Most High," refusing to bow to a truth that would liberate you from its tyranny. The great Sufi sage Al-Jawahiri, in his unveiled masterpiece Kashf al-Majab, speaks of this very struggle when he describes the seeker's initial stages on the path. He writes that the nafs is like a dog that barks at the approach of a stranger. The stranger here is the divine light, and the barking is that cynical laughter, that internal resistance, a desperate attempt to protect its territory from the invading grace of the real. Imagine a man, a seeker, sitting alone in a small, candlelit room. The world outside is asleep, lost in its dreams, but he is attempting to be awake. He closes his eyes and begins the simplest and most profound of acts: La ilaha illa Allah. There is no God but God. And with the first repetition, the laughter begins. It does not sound like laughter, but like a torrent of thoughts. Did you remember to send that email? What will you say in the meeting tomorrow? This posture is uncomfortable. You are not doing this correctly. That person you admire would never need to do something so basic. The mind, the primary instrument of the ego, throws up a wall of distractions, each one a subtle scoff at the simplicity of the act. It is here, in this precise battlefield of the heart, that the great war is fought not with swords, but with breath, with intention, with the soft, persistent hammering of the divine name against the chains of the self. The seeker feels nothing but the strain, the dryness, the seeming futility. He feels the chains, thick and cold, and hears the clinking sound they make with every movement of his heart. He cannot yet see that the chains are not being strengthened by his struggle, but that with every sincere utterance, a divine love has begun to heat them, to soften them, preparing them not to be broken by force, but to be dissolved by a presence so complete that the metal of the ego simply cannot retain its form. And so, the seeker persists, not through a feeling of ecstasy, but through a stubborn, weary faith, a faith that resides not in the mind, but in a deeper, more ancient part of the heart that remembers a covenant the ego has long since forgotten. The laughter, once a sharp, distracting cry, begins to change its tone. It does not cease, but it becomes strained, as if the very source of its mockery is being drained of its energy. The thoughts that once flooded the mind during Dhikr begin to slow, not because the seeker has fought them off, but because a subtle shift in attention has occurred. It is as if the seeker has been trying to shout down the voice of the ego with the words of Dhikr, and in exhaustion, finally falls silent, simply listening to the Dhikr itself. This is the first, almost imperceptible crack in the fortress wall. The repetition of the divine names ceases to be a task performed by the tongue and starts to become a resonance felt in the chest. The great Imam Al-Ghazali, in his Ihya Ulum al-Din, describes this transition with exquisite care, explaining that remembrance begins on the tongue, but its true destination is the heart, and the journey between them is traversed by the bridge of sincere presence. The ego laughed at the tongue, but it grows nervous when the heart begins to stir. For you see, the ego is a master of complexity, but it is helpless before absolute simplicity. It can analyze, deconstruct, and mock any philosophical concept, any ritual, any intellectual understanding of God. But Dhikr, in its essence, is not an intellectual exercise. It is the heart's direct address to its source. It is the technology of return. With each Allah, the seeker is not reciting a word, they are casting a lifeline into the ocean of divine presence, and something, at last, is beginning to pull back. The chains that felt so cold and solid begin to develop a strange warmth. This is not a metaphorical warmth, but a palpable sensation that the seeker begins to feel in the center of their chest, a gentle heat that spreads outward with every heartbeat, which has now synchronized itself with the rhythm of the remembrance. The ego perceives this warmth as a threat, for it is the first physical symptom of its own undoing. Its laughter turns into a frantic whisper, a last-ditch effort to regain control. This is just a physiological response, it insists. You are hypnotizing yourself. This feeling is not real. But the heart, once it has tasted even a drop of this divine wine, knows a truth that the ego can never comprehend. This is the moment of the great unveiling, the kashf, that Al-Ujwairi spoke of. The seeker realizes, in a flash of gentle insight, that the laughter was never a sign of the practice's failure, but a sign of its profound efficacy. You only shore up the defenses of a fortress when a real army is approaching its gates. The ego would not fight so fiercely if it were not terrified of what it stands to lose, its very existence. And in this realization, the seeker does not fight back. Instead, they do something far more powerful, they simply continue. They return their attention, again and again, to the sacred phrase, to the feeling of warmth in the chest, to the sound of their own breath becoming begins to recede like a wave pulling back from the shore, and what it leaves behind is not nothingness, but a profound and pregnant silence. It is in this silence that the seeker hears something new, something that has been there all along, underneath the noise of the self. It is a sound like the faintest, most beautiful melody, a frequency of pure, unconditional acceptance. It is the first whisper of divine love, not as a concept, but as a tangible presence entering the heart's chamber. The chains have not broken, but they have begun to glow, and in that light, the seeker sees that they were never made of iron, but of hardened fear, and fear cannot withstand the direct gaze of love. The silence that now envelopes the seeker is not an empty void, but a presence so full, so complete, that it absorbs the very concept of sound. The frantic whispers of the ego, which once commanded such attention, now seem like the distant, meaningless chirping of a sparrow in a vast, silent cathedral. The seeker does not silence the ego, they simply cease to listen, for their entire being is becoming attuned to a far more captivating frequency. The warmth in the chest is no longer just a sensation, it has become a liquid light, a honeyed radiance that flows through the veins instead of blood, that saturates every cell with a consciousness of being loved, of being known, of being utterly and completely seen. This is the divine love that the poets and saints have tried for centuries to describe with words that always, inevitably, fall short. It is not an emotion that the heart produces, it is the fundamental substance of reality that the heart is finally allowing to enter. The chains of the ego, now glowing a soft, golden orange, do not strain or snap. They begin to behave not like metal, but like salt dissolving in the ocean. With every pulse of this liquid light, with every heartbeat that has become the rhythm of Allah. Who? Allah. Who, their solidity simply melts away, returning to the formless essence from which they were forged in the first place. In this state, the seeker understands a secret that the ego could never grasp. The chains were not holding them prisoner, they were the only thing giving the ego the illusion of a separate shape. The ego was not a solid entity to be destroyed, but a collection of hardened beliefs, frozen fears, and calcified identities. Divine love is the sun, and the ego is an ice sculpture. The sun does not fight the ice, it simply shines, and the ice, by its very nature, must return to its fluid, essential state water, ready to flow in the currents of a divine will. The seeker now witnesses this melting within themselves. The identity of being a failure, a memory that once felt like an iron manacle around the ankle, simply softens and loses its meaning. The need for validation, a heavy chain that stooped the shoulders, evaporates in the warmth of a love that validates existence itself. There is no battle, no violent struggle. There is only the gentle, inexorable process of a false self returning to its truth. Rumi, in his boundless wisdom, perfectly captured this moment when he wrote, "I have been a sword, I became a mirror." The ego is the sword, hard and sharp, defining itself by what it can cut and defend against. But under the gaze of divine love, it becomes a mirror, reflecting only the beauty and reality of the beloved, its own separate identity now transparent and non-existent. The laughter has ceased entirely. In its place is a awe so profound it feels like the only appropriate response. The seeker realizes that the ego was not an enemy to be defeated, but a lost child to be welcomed home. Its mockery was the cry of that lost child, terrified of the very love that sought to embrace it. In the moment of dissolution, there is no death, only a homecoming. The Quranic verse, "Verily in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest," is no longer a beautiful promise to be believed, but a lived reality to be inhabited. The heart has found its sakina, its divine tranquility, because it has found its true home. The seeker is no longer doing Dhikr, the Dhikr is being done through them. They have become a hollow reed, and the breath of the divine is moving through them, creating the music of remembrance. The distinction between the one who remembers and the one who is remembered begins to blur, then fade altogether. There is only remembrance. There is only the love. There is only the one. The fortress of the self has not been stormed, its gates were opened from the inside by a love that recognized itself within. The chains are gone not because they were broken, but because the prisoner finally understood there was never a lock on the door, only the illusion of one, sustained by the fear of stepping into the infinite, loving freedom that had been waiting all along. What remains when the chains dissolve? When the noise of the self falls away, what is left to hear? What is left to be? For a moment, there is only a breathtaking, silent emptiness, a cathedral of the heart swept clean of all its former tenants. This is not the emptiness of absence, but the fullness of potential, the fertile void from which all of creation springs. The seeker, or rather, what was once the seeker, rests in this stillness. The great annihilation, fana, has occurred. The identity that was constructed, defended, and suffered for has vanished like a mirage in the desert, not because it was violently destroyed, but because the sun of divine reality has risen, revealing its inherent insubstantiality. In this state, there is no individual left to claim the experience, no one to feel proud of the achievement, no one to even label it as an achievement. There is only the serene, unadorned presence of being aware of itself. The struggle is over not because it was won, but because the parties involved, the seeker and the sought, have realized they were never two. The war was a phantom, fought in a dream from which the heart has now, gently, awoken. But the journey of the soul does not end in annihilation. The Sufi path speaks of a second birth, arising from the ashes of the self into a new and enduring life. This is Baka, the abiding in God. It is here that the divine qualities, which were always the soul's true inheritance, begin to manifest spontaneously, without the effort or desire of a separate ego. The heart, now a perfectly polished mirror, does nothing but reflect the attributes of the one who gazes into it. If compassion is needed, compassion flows through the person without a thought of "I am being compassionate." If truth must be spoken, it is spoken with a clarity unclouded by personal fear or desire. The person moves through the world, but they are no longer of it in the same binding way. They eat, they work, they speak, they engage, but all actions are now performed as a service, a continuous and natural extension of that same remembrance. They have become a living, breathing Dhikr. The Quranic verse, "Wherever you turn, there is the face of Allah," is no longer a theological concept but the literal, perceptual reality of their presence in the leaf falling from the tree, in the smile of a stranger, in the hardship that befalls them, for the consciousness that perceives has become unified with the source of all that is perceived. This abiding presence is the true answer to the ego's initial laughter. The ego laughed at the simplicity of Dhikr because it could not conceive of a state where complexity is resolved not by analysis, but by unification. It could not imagine a power that comes not from control, but from surrender. The person who abides in this state carries a silent, unshakable peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. The world continues with all its chaos and beauty, but it can no longer disrupt the profound stillness at the core of their being. They are in the ocean, and though waves may rise and fall on the surface, the depths remain undisturbed. This is the ultimate liberation, not freedom from the world, but freedom within the world. The chains are gone, and what was once a prisoner has become a wanderer in the gardens of divine proximity, a custodian of a love that seeks to express itself through every glance, every word, and every silent breath. The practice of Dhikr has reached its culmination. It began as a task, became a transformation, and has now become the very essence of the soul's abiding reality. The circle is complete. The lover has finally vanished into the beloved, and only the beloved remains, looking out through the eyes that once wept in longing, now shining with a quiet, knowing light. The journey of the sleeping sovereign does not end with the peaceful governance of a private inner kingdom. That is merely its beginning. The ultimate purpose of awakening to your divine vicegerency is to recognize that the kingdom you were meant to rule has no borders, for it is the entire field of your perception, the whole of the world that meets your aware heart. The crown you have placed upon your own head is not for solitary glory, but for universal service. Ibn Arabi's profound revelation culminates in this: the Insan al-Kamil, the complete human, is the mirror in which God contemplates his own names and attributes in the created world. You are that mirror. Your sovereign awareness is the polish that allows the divine reality to see itself clearly in every atom of existence. When you rule from this understanding, your very presence becomes a blessing, a silent decree of love and recognition that touches everything and everyone you encounter. Your sovereignty is now tested and expressed in the marketplace of life. The difficult colleague, the demanding relative, the stranger in need, they are no longer external problems, but part of the limitless kingdom you were called to govern with wisdom and compassion. You engage with them not from the ego's fragile sense of self, but from the throne of the heart, which sees the hidden sovereign sleeping within them. Your duty is not to control them, but to interact in a way that, however subtly, honors their own divine essence and perhaps helps them remember it. You become a silent ambassador of the real, a living invitation to awakening. Your work, your art, your simplest gestures all become acts of royal service, offerings placed upon the altar of the one, true King. This is the secret of the Quranic verse: I have only created jinn and mankind to worship me. To worship, in this highest sense, is to be so consciously aligned with the divine will that your entire life becomes a continuous, walking prayer, a perfect reflection of divine attributes in action. The crown you wear is invisible, but its weight is the gentle, constant responsibility of love. The scepter you hold is your intention, forever pointing your consciousness back to its source. The throne you occupy is the eternal now, the holy ground of the present moment. You are a king who is also a servant, a ruler who is also a slave of the Most High. This is the paradox and the perfection of your station. The long sleep is over. The forgotten path has been remembered. You have returned to your throne not to rest, but to reign, to consciously, lovingly, and courageously participate in the divine administration of reality. Go forth now, not as a seeker, but as a sovereign. Let your life be your kingdom, your heart your throne, and your every breath a silent, powerful decree of the presence of the One. The sovereign is awake. The kingdom is at hand. The world has been waiting for you. And so, this journey that began with the ego's mocking laughter in a lonely room finds its resolution not in a distant time or a faraway land, but here, in this very moment, in the silent space between one breath and the next, in the quiet rhythm of your own waiting heart. This story of dissolution and abiding is not merely a historical account or a mystical tale, it is the living blueprint of your own soul's deepest longing. The seeker in the story is you. The ego that laughed is the same voice you hear in your moments of doubt. The divine love that dissolved every chain is the same unconditional presence that is breathing you at this very instant, patiently awaiting your remembrance. The entire universe, in its infinite expanse, is contained within the human heart, and the entire path of Sufism is simply the art of learning to navigate its vast, inner geography. You are not a stranger seeking to enter a forbidden palace, you are a beloved child who has forgotten they are already home, walking through familiar rooms in the dim light of forgetfulness, believing yourself to be lost. Dhikr is the act of lighting a lamp, and by its light, you see that you have always been in the throne room of the beloved. What, then, is to be done? How do you take this ancient map and begin your own journey? You start exactly where the seeker in our story started, not with grand gestures, but with a single, sincere moment. You do not need to retreat from the world, you need to invite the divine into the world you already inhabit. Let your commute become a walking meditation, the name of Allah echoing with the rhythm of your steps. Let the waiting in line at the market become an opportunity for silent remembrance, transforming frustration into gratitude. Let the very anxiety that tightens your chest become the trigger that returns your attention to the heart, where a love greater than any fear resides. The practice is not about adding another task to your day, it is about infusing every task with a sacred purpose. Begin with just 5 minutes. Sit in a quiet corner, close your eyes, and feel the weight of your own being. Then, with the exhale, release the name Allah, not as a word on the tongue, but as a seed planted in the soil of your heart. Water it with your attention. Tend to it with your patience. Do not listen for the ego's laughter, listen for the silence that follows the name. That silence is the soil in which divine love grows. This unbroken chain of remembrance that stretches back through Rumi, to Al-Ghazali, to the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him. You are not alone in this. The entire cosmos is engaged in this same remembrance, the stars in their orbits, the birds in their dawn chorus, are all participating in their own form of Dhikr. By choosing to remember consciously, you are not starting something new, you are joining a chorus that has been singing since the beginning of time. You are aligning your individual heart with the universal heartbeat of creation. The chains that you feel, the burden of past regrets, the anxiety for the future, the loneliness of the present, they are no stronger than the ones that were dissolved in our story. They, too, are vulnerable to the persistent, gentle fire of divine love. So, let this not be the end of a story, but the beginning of your own. Let your life become the next great memoir of mystical transformation. The path is open. The invitation has been whispered. Your heart is the only key you need. This was the story of how the ego's laughter was met with a silence that changed everything. But your journey is unique. What is the one chain you feel holding you back? Share it in the comments below. Let us remember together that no chain is stronger than divine love. And if you are ready to walk this path further, to discover how Rumi's own desperate seeking was utterly transformed by a single encounter, then your next step awaits in the video that appears now. The material world never expected this ancient Sufi secret of fana.